Medusa was never the monster, the shocking truth behind the myth. What if the monster was never the monster? What if everything you were taught about Medusa, the snakes, the stone, the horror, was a distortion? For centuries, Medusa has been described as one of the most terrifying figures in Greek mythology. A gorgon, a creature with venomous serpents for hair, a gaze so deadly it could turn any man to stone. Heroes were celebrated for destroying her. Statues immortalized her defeat. Perseus became a legend, but here is the unsettling truth. Medusa was not born a monster, she became one, and that changes everything. In the oldest layers of Greek myth, Medusa is one of the three Gorgons, daughters of ancient sea deities. But later versions of the story, especially the Roman poet Ovid's account, introduce something far more disturbing. Medusa was once a beautiful mortal woman, a priestess in the temple of Athena, devoted, pure, sacred, until Poseidon desired her. In the myth, he violated her inside Athena's temple. And instead of receiving protection, Medusa was punished. Athena transformed her hair into snakes, twisted her beauty into something grotesque, turned her gaze into a weapon. Stop for a moment. Read that again. The victim was transformed into the monster. This is not just mythology, this is psychology. Medusa represents something ancient and uncomfortable, the transformation of trauma into visible power. In psychological terms, trauma changes the nervous system. It alters perception. It rewires how a person interacts with the world. Survivors often develop hypervigilance, emotional defenses, and a presence that others misinterpret as threatening. Medusa's gaze turning men to stone is a metaphor for paralysis. When confronted with unprocessed pain, people freeze. They do not know how to respond. They become rigid, defensive, immobile. The snakes on her head? Think symbolically. Snakes in mythology represent danger, rebirth, instinct, primal awareness, but psychologically they resemble intrusive thoughts. Writhing, relentless, impossible to silence. Trauma does not sit quietly, it moves, it coils, it waits. Now consider Perseus, the hero who beheaded Medusa. In every retelling, he never looks at her directly. He uses a mirrored shield. He avoids eye contact. He kills her by reflection. This detail is not accidental. In psychology, avoidance is one of the strongest coping mechanisms. When something is overwhelming, we look away, we deflect. We distance ourselves from what is too intense to confront directly. Perseus survives not by courage alone, but by avoidance. And here is where the myth becomes even more symbolic. After her death, Medusa's head does not lose its power. Even severed, it retains the ability to turn enemies to stone. Perseus uses it as a weapon. Athena places it on her shield. Wisdom does not discard the monster, wisdom integrates it. That is the shocking truth behind the myth. Medusa was never simply a villain. She was a symbol of wounded power, a projection of cultural fear, a reflection of society's discomfort with untamed feminine energy. Throughout history, powerful women have often been labeled dangerous. Independent women, threatening, autonomous women, disruptive, women who cannot be controlled, monstrous. Medusa's face becomes a mirror, not of horror, but of projection. In Jungian psychology, there is a concept called the shadow. The shadow contains the parts of ourselves we repress: anger, sexuality, rage, vulnerability, power. When these parts are denied, they do not disappear. They distort. They become monstrous in our imagination. Medusa embodies the shadow of collective fear. Her image forces confrontation. Her gaze demands acknowledgement. To look at Medusa is to face what has been denied, and most people would rather turn to stone than do that. There is another layer to this myth that makes it even more powerful. When Perseus kills Medusa, from her blood springs Pegasus, the winged horse. Beauty and transcendence born from violence, creation emerging from destruction. This is not random storytelling. It reflects post-traumatic growth, the psychological phenomenon where individuals emerge from adversity with new strength, clarity, and depth. Pain can produce wisdom. Wounds can generate transformation. Medusa's story is not about defeat. It is about metamorphosis. But myths are shaped by those who tell them. And for centuries, the dominant narrative celebrated Perseus as the hero and Medusa as the monster. That narrative reveals more about cultural values than about her character. The real terror in the myth was not her face. It was what she symbolized. A woman who survived violation, a woman who could not be possessed, a woman whose gaze could not be dominated. In a patriarchal mythological structure, that kind of power becomes threatening, so she is framed as a beast. Yet in modern reinterpretations, Medusa has become a symbol of protection. Survivors of assault use her image as a sign of resilience. Artists portray her not as grotesque, but as fierce, not as cursed, but as awakened. The myth evolves because its meaning evolves, and that is the nature of archetypes. Greek mythology was never just about gods and monsters, it was a psychological map. Every figure represents an inner force. Zeus is authority, Athena is wisdom, Hades is the unconscious, and Medusa is the moment pain becomes visible, the moment the wounded refuse to be silent, the moment beauty transforms into boundary, the moment vulnerability hardens into protection. She is terrifying because she forces recognition. Think about how often society labels what it fears as monstrous. Emotions we cannot control, people we cannot dominate, truths we do not want to face. We turn them into villains. The myth of Medusa is not just an ancient Greek story, it is a pattern that still repeats. Victims blamed, power reframed as threat, autonomy labeled dangerous, but the symbolism refuses to die. Look at how her image persists in art, psychology, and feminist interpretation. Look at how often people revisit her story, asking the same question: was she ever truly evil, or was she misunderstood? The shocking truth behind the myth is this: Medusa represents transformation under injustice. She represents the psychological cost of trauma. She represents the power that emerges when someone can no longer be controlled. And perhaps most unsettling of all, she represents the fear of facing truth directly. Because to look at Medusa is to look at something raw, something intense, something honest. And honesty can petrify. So maybe the real question is not whether Medusa was a monster. Maybe the question is why we needed her to be one. Myths survive because they reveal patterns that remain relevant. The story of Medusa continues to resonate because it exposes the tension between power and fear, trauma and projection, destruction and rebirth. And if this perspective shifted how you see her, if it made you reconsider who the real monster was, then you have just experienced what mythology was always meant to do: not entertain, reveal. If you want to continue exploring the hidden psychology behind Greek mythology, the archetypes, the symbols, and the deeper truths buried beneath ancient stories, subscribe and stay on this journey. Because the next myth we uncover may not just explain the past, it may explain you.